Hardly anyone does that, and it's incredibly helpful. A good framework for thinking is physics, the sort of first principles reasoning. I mean, generally, I think there are, what I mean by that is boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. Through most of our life, we get through life by reasoning by analogy, which essentially means kind of copying what other people do with slight variations. And you have to do that, otherwise it's mentally, you wouldn't be able to get through the day. But when you want to do something new, you have to apply the physics approach. Physics is really sort of figured out how to discover new things that are counterintuitive, like quantum mechanics. It's really counterintuitive. So I think that's an important thing to do. And then also to really pay attention to negative feedback and solicit it, particularly from friends. This may sound like sort of simple advice, but it's hardly anyone does that, and it's incredibly helpful. You kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there. Mm-hmm. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact, people do, that battery packs are really expensive, and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you wouldn't be able to ever get to that new thing.
Right.
It's like you can't say, horses. Nobody wants a car because horses are great and we're used to them and they can eat grass and there's lots of grass all over the place and there's there's no gasoline that people can buy, so people are never going to get cars.
Right.
People did say that. And for batteries, they would say, it's going to cost. Historically, it's cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and so it's not going to be much better than that in the future. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? Mm-hmm. What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, what if we bought that on the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, oh, geez, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. Mm-hmm. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much, much cheaper than anyone realizes. If you want to do something really innovative, you have to apply a sort of first principles analysis, and don't reason by analogy. Analogies are referencing the past. First principles means you look at the most fundamental truths in a particular arena, and the things that really are almost indisputably correct, and you reason up from there to a conclusion. And if you see that conclusion is at odds with what people generally believe, then you have an opportunity. Mm. Now, you can't operate like that on all things because it takes too much mental horsepower. So most of your life you have to operate by reasoning by analogy. But if you really want to innovate, you must reason from first principles to identify the problem. Well, I think it's important to have a very to apply critical thinking to. This may sound trite, but to apply critical thinking to what one is doing, by that I mean just the fundamentals of logic. Do you have the right axioms? Are they relevant, and are you making the right conclusions based on those axioms? That's the essence of critical thinking, and yet it is amazing how often people fail to do that. I think wishful thinking is innate in the human brain. You want things to be the way you wish them to be, and so you tend to filter information that you shouldn't filter. That's the most common flaw that I see.